The month of June has been very good to your Ohio State Buckeyes.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Buckeye fans, to a Tuesday edition of Locked On Buckeyes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, here on Tuesday, June 25th in the year 2024. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. During today's episode, Brian Smith, who is Locked On's recruiting analyst, is back with us once again to dive into the commitment of Zion Grady, discuss if the Buckeyes can pull Vernell Brown III away from the Sunshine State, and also other players that are on Ohio State's radar. This is the place to get all of the Ohio State football recruiting news you need and you would ever want. And Brian Smith is a guy that's going to deliver it to you. And as we welcome in Brian Smith, I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. One thing Brian Smith told me last week at the end of last week's show was if we do recruiting shows this week, post them immediately. So some of you will be seeing the show a little bit earlier than expected because recruiting stuff's going to happen sooner than you think. Just like Zion Grady on Monday ended up committing to Ohio State, a verbal commitment that, Brian, I did not expect to happen.
Welcome to recruiting in 2024. And this is a kid I know. He's from Southern Alabama. I mean, that's prime Ohio State territory.
Right.
Notice the sarcasm there. Ohio State's never signed anybody from down there. Like, that area is as rural as it gets. It's, you know, you're worried about driving at night from hitting all the deer. Like, there's nothing out there. So it's wild because he had offers from Auburn and Florida State and Miami and Georgia, all these schools, Tennessee, and then he commits to Ohio State. Mm-hmm. That is as left field as it gets. Again, welcome to recruiting in the modern era.
That's a Larry Johnson effect to me, Brian. Just Larry Johnson doing his thing and really being able to, in his mid-70s, I believe, early 70s, being able to still connect with athletes from all over the country, especially in this part of the country, as you said so well. Ohio State doesn't get kids from down there. And being able to get a kid from down there, I won't say one. I think it's a Nick Saban effect, too. And Saban's gone.
Oh, yeah. Because he was committed to Bama at one point. Yeah, you're right.
I mean, if Saban's there, like Larry Johnson, as good as he is, you're not getting that kid out of Alabama. But I do still think a lot of people have a disbelief in Larry Johnson. And, Brian, this isn't not the place for that, not for me at least, because I still believe in Larry Johnson, the coach and the recruiter, and we see it with Grady's commitment.
Hey, man, the proof's in the pudding. The only thing he can do right now is commit. He cannot sign. He's still got to deliver the goods on December 4th, but this is as good as it gets. Like, again, his list is as elite as it can be. Great kid, could play outside linebacker, could be a true down man in a four-man front, which I assume Ohio State's going to stick with. This is the kind of guy Ohio State doesn't get enough of. An edge rusher that's 6'3", 225, and has the frame to be 255 and still just as twitchy.
You think he's more of a weak side defensive end?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah.
I would think so too. When it comes to Grady, though, do you think he'll be able to pull other players from Alabama up north to Columbus?
Ooh, depends on what you mean from the South. Like, the area he's from, that's a once a 25-year deal.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, it's when you say the deep South, it's weird. It doesn't mean it's further. That means it's like the mid-region.
Yeah.
South Carolina to like East Texas, that going east to west there, that area is different. Florida, Central and South Florida is not really a part of the South because it's got so many people from up north. That area where he's from is really scarce to get kids like that. Those kids just don't leave the South very often. So take it when you can get it, though, brother, especially if you can get a pass rusher. There aren't enough of those anyway. So that was one of the big priorities that the entire staff knew they needed. and Ohio State goes out and gets one. It's kind of funny because there's 2 or 3 pretty good pass rushers in the state of Ohio.
Yeah.
And this kid's I don't know how many they want, but I guess this is a message. If you don't want to commit, we'll go find one somewhere else.
And I think it's a good message you say that, because Ohio State does want to lock down the state. But I've said it before, Brian. I haven't said it in a while. You can't just focus on Ohio or the Midwest region. You have to go out and get guys all over the country, really all over the world, because Ohio State's known to go out to other countries to get punters and bring them back to the States. You have to do that. If there's a guy like Grady, man, if he's in Ohio, if he's in Alabama, if he's in California, you go out there and get him. You have to go out there and pursue him and make him a priority, because if you don't, you can be where Ohio State currently is and not have enough depth at defensive end if a couple guys get hurt.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. Ohio State's depth at defensive end is pretty solid, but is it where it probably needs to be year in, year out? Yeah, that's debatable. Adding a kid like this, you still got other guys on the board too. They have a chance to get a turnaround class, if you will, one that's going to have numbers and top end talent. And that's what they needed in this class, 100%.
So when I mentioned him bringing other guys up from Alabama, the first guy, really only guy on my mind right now, is Malik Autry, the current still Auburn commit. Recently took an official visit to Ohio State. We talked about him last week, Brian. Going to bring him up again right now. There's a lot of buzz. Some saying yes, some saying no. I am still wait and see, even if there's a verbal. But you got to sign to the line for me to truly believe you're going to be in Columbus. But regardless of signing day, do you think there's a chance Ohio State finds a way to flip that commitment verbally, to have him verbally commit to Ohio State?
That would be the ultimate coup. He could almost get out of bed and walk to Auburn's campus from where he lives. I just can't see it. Now, I didn't see any chance at all that Zion Grady would commit. I didn't think they'd finish in the Final 5. So stranger things obviously do happen. Autry has helped recruit players to Auburn, though. The only way I could see it being that case is if the NIL package that they offered was way more in Auburn, and Auburn's got deep pockets. So I just can't see it. Prove me wrong is all I'm going to say. I think he signs with Auburn. I don't think he'll flip, but I don't know what the money is and all that too. So I'm only partially involved in this. There could be things going on I don't know about.
Brian, from one guy who committed to Ohio State early this week to a guy many Buckeye fans as a receiver would love for him to lead the Sunshine State to play at Ohio State. Going to talk about Vernell Brown III next, and he's a talented receiver that many Buckeye fans would love to wear the scarlet and gray. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Brian, we do a lot of talking about guys in Florida. Really, it seems like almost every show, if not every show, we skip Florida and go right back down to Florida. This is another one of those receivers that I understand why Hartline loves, but Brian, also pulling him out of Florida will be very hard.
Vernell Brown is the traditional slot receiver that if you don't get your hands on him pretty much at the snap of the football, you're in trouble. Very few corners are going to stick with him. And if you got a linebacker or a nickel, that's even harder. Offers from pretty much everybody in the country, all the Florida schools, Ohio State, Georgia, whatever he wanted to do. Ohio State's one of the few schools outside of the Sunshine State that had any shot at him. I think the receiver tradition has something to do with that. And Ohio State's actually recruited Florida well for as long as I can remember. Florida and Florida State are the teams that are rumored, but I know he's going to go on a little vacation, kind of think it over. Ohio State's had him on campus. We'll see. But great kid, 4.9 GPA, by the way, which that's solid. So he could have went to Stanford or Wake Forest or anywhere he wanted and been fine. But great kid, very twitchy. He's been dominant at the camps and stuff. So yeah, great football player.
That twitchiness you speak of right there, we're talking about, hey, if you don't get your hands on him, he might get up the field really quickly. He caught not a swing pass, almost like a quick screen, like a smoke screen, and he went down the line of scrimmage and then cut up field, slipped up past a few guys, and I'm like, sir, you're not supposed to do that. That's not supposed to happen on the football field, but he found a way to wiggle his way through the defense, and I'm like, oh, now I understand why Ohio State wants him. This is also at the beginning, I believe it was this huddle film I was looking at that I was like, oh, okay, like this all clicks. It all makes sense to me. But I want to go back to something that we touched on. I mentioned earlier, you touched on it. You're battling with Florida, Florida State, and even Miami to pull him out from Orlando to get him up to Columbus. That's difficult. But as you mentioned, the NIL package that they might have to deliver to Autry, you might have to do that same thing to get Brown to Ohio State.
His legacy is with UF, and his dad was there. He even was a part of the staff there in some capacity. I forget his role at one point. So those things are difficult, but he's a well-rounded kid. Like guys that have a 4.9 GPA look at the world a little different. You know, he can go get an architecture degree or whatever he wanted. He's ready for that kind of challenge. But at the same time, he wants to go somewhere he's going to win, wants to play. And I think that second one I mentioned is the biggest obstacle for Ohio State in receiver recruiting this year. They've just signed so many good receivers the last few years. Playing time is not exactly readily available. And I think that's hindering them this year, and I don't think there's anything they can do about it. It's one thing to beat Florida, Florida State, Miami. It's another to beat them when you have your depth chart in Columbus.
The one advantage I do believe Ohio State has over any of the in-state schools, the top three, UCF is one of those schools that's going to be coming up, but still not at the level of Florida, Florida State, or Miami right now. The development. Ohio State develops receivers in a way that almost no school outside of maybe Alabama does in the country. And I'm not going to be naive and say Alabama does not. No, they do the same thing Ohio State does. Actually, had a Heisman Trophy winner at receiver recently. But that's the one thing Ohio State can be a major selling point. What is a reason why he should leave Florida? To be developed by Brian Hartline. Now, if I'm him, and you say he might think differently, which is great, you got a 4.9 GPA, he might be wondering, how long will Hartline be there? Because every offseason, Hartline is a candidate for a OC job elsewhere, somebody else's head coaching job outside of Ohio State. So for him, it might not just be the legacy factor to stay in Florida, maybe to go to Florida, but to also be somewhere where you think someone's going to be there for at least 2 years. Because Hartline, I think, will be here, me personally, for a couple of years. But over the next 3 to 5 years, I could easily see Hartline leaving. It wouldn't shock me.
That's kind of the nature of it now. These kids are in a bad spot. I've said it many times on this show. They pick schools because of the coach recruiting them, not the school itself. Probably shouldn't, but that's what they do. When the guy leaves, are you going to be happy there? And the answer is almost always no.
Yeah.
But again, if you're at a place like Ohio State, they got more resources. I would think it's a safer bet than some other places. And you just got to rely on their staff to be filled with somebody excellent. I highly doubt they would have a hard time getting applications for a receivers coach based on the talent that's available. I'm sure that you would accept that job right now, and I'll be your agent, and we'll work through it, Jay. But I can't say that you're not right, though. They're going to be negatively recruited against until he leaves.
Yeah.
It's out there. It's unavoidable. There's nothing you can do about it because he's looked at jobs, and he should. So if he ever wants to be a head coach, you got to start somewhere else. He's not going to be the head coach of the Buckeyes or any place like that, Tennessee, whatever, unless you go somewhere else first. So it is part of the business, man. If you don't have guys on your staff that other schools want, that means you're not winning the title. You don't get it both ways. That's not how it works in this era. So that's just part of the business.
When it comes to this young man in Florida, him being a legacy dad, I believe his dad's also like Anthony Richardson's manager. So he's leaving Florida to be a manager of a really high profile younger receiver in the NFL. That stuff matters. And now you talk to recruits more than I do, so I don't know how recruits feel about, well, my dad has a job in this portion of the country, so I want to be closer to him for just geographic reasons. But once again, Florida kids are different. So I'm trying to feel like, does he want to follow his dad and be in the same region of the country, the Midwest, over following where his dad played football? I don't know about where kids really feel. Is it follow the family, be near family, or just do my own thing and pave my own path?
I think that's kid to kid. Vernell, I don't think it would matter. His dad will be in Indianapolis. I mean, starting quarterback for the Colts is a guy that he's going to be managing. It's kind of important.
Yeah.
But he'll probably bounce around. He's a guy that follows his son closely. They got a good relationship. I don't think that's going to be a problem either way. So it'd be cool because from Indianapolis, it's about 3.5 hours to Columbus, 3 hours, something like that. That'd be a nice happy medium. I don't think he'd have any problems going to see him, but if he doesn't, the plane flight's not that bad either.
No, not at all. Brian, last thing here in this little portion of the show, I didn't put this in the document before we started, but I just remembered that Tavion St. Clair not only took an official visit to Ohio State, but he also performed in the Elite 11. Didn't win the MVP, but his accuracy was on full display. What do recruits, receivers that you talk to, how do they view quarterbacks that go out to that big event this time of year to compete in it?
It's something that's talked about, especially off air. They don't want to ruffle feathers, which is smart.
Yeah.
But they know which schools are getting guys that can get them the ball. I've lost track of how many times I've talked to a kid and they're like, I like this school, but their quarterback sucks. Like I've had those conversations and I'm not asking them about the quarterback. They bring it up to me. So that matters. It helps Ohio State in both directions. You get a good quarterback, then you get a good receiver. You get a good receiver, like it works together because no two positions in sport are intertwined as much. I think that Ohio State's in a pretty good spot, especially after they got Julian Sayin.
Man,
You know, he's probably going to be the quarter. I think he'll end up being the quarterback by the end of this year, if not next year. So if you're in that spot, are you going to struggle to get guys on campus? No. And it works the other direction too. After you seen Jeremiah Smith come, it probably wasn't hard for Julian to end up going there. So these things work themselves out.
You know, it's interesting you bring up Sayin and him playing quarterback this year as a freshman, because somebody else, one of my buddies, actually says he thinks Sayin should be the day one starter. I haven't gone that far. You and I have talked about that here on the show about really the danger sometimes of playing a freshman right away. But why do you think he has a chance to be a quarterback this year at Ohio State?
Just from what I've been told from within, he's the guy that gets it, and he's just incredibly accurate. The downside to it is the same things that you hear, and there's no fixing these. He hasn't been through the weight room program. There's absolutely no fixing that because can you take the pounding? Who knows? And if he does struggle, you can stun his growth above the shoulders, meaning kids lose their confidence. I mean, if you throw a pick six and lose a game, you're 18 years old. Look, Ohio State fans, they're not very friendly when things don't go well. So the inbox, you got to turn it off. So those are the reasons that freshmen don't play at major programs at quarterback very often. And especially in Ohio State's, which it's more of a pro style. It's more complex. That's hard. I think he will play at parts of this year, take it over, especially game one. There's no way in the world they're doing. There's no way they're doing that.
Not at all. Not at all. Brian, from two guys, one guy committed, one guy may be committing to Ohio State. We'll have to wait to see where Brown commits. But to two more guys that committed over the weekend that are more projects for Ohio State, I think they can be good players down the road. We'll dive into these two players next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Brian, let's talk about the Miller kid first. I believe it's Bodpin Miller is his name. Plays high school quarterback right now in Ohio, committed to Ohio State. He's being recruited as a quarterback / athlete, and Hartline saw him at a recruiting camp, gave him an offer, and he ended up committing via a verbal commitment to Ohio State. That transition to me, he's an athletic kid. It shows up and pops off on the film. But transitioning from being a high school quarterback to a college receiver, Brian, to me, that seems really hard.
There have been a lot of guys that do it, but in today's era, the college game has grown so much at the receiver position. How fast the players and all that is one thing, but how fast they pick up the scheme is another.
Yeah.
An old saying is, it doesn't matter how fast you are if you're running the wrong direction. So if you don't know the scheme, you don't understand the adjustments, blitzes, and how you adjust your route, all those things. He's starting from scratch. He's a redshirt kid, lock to redshirt, but he's 6'3", 6'4". He's a decent quarterback at the high school level. His motion leaves much to be desired.
Yes, it does.
But he's got a pretty good arm and good touch. So he has a feel for the game, and he's used to the passing game because he's been the guy delivering the football. I'm curious about it. There have been guys to do this. Florida State, Notre Dame, Texas, everybody's had somebody do it. Ohio State's had guys do it. How long will it take? Because with his size, he could be that rare boundary receiver that's probably the biggest reason. Like if you're going to miss, I've had coaches tell me this. If I'm going to miss with size. I'd like a nickel for every time I've heard that. Basketball in particular, but very similar in football. He could be your 6'3", 220-pound boundary receiver as a junior. They're kind of betting on their own development, which Ohio State absolutely deservedly needs to be able to back themselves up on. And it is an in-state kid. This is an easier pick if you're going to do it. So good for him and good for Ohio State. I'm glad they do their own evaluations that way because it would be easy to get arrogant because they get so many elite receivers and not take this kid. I like the eval and doing your own homework.
Is it normal for schools to do their own homework this time of year? Because I feel like Ohio State works maybe a little bit different at times than other schools, but they're doing their homework on these two guys we're talking about at the end of the show, which is why they got those offers. But is it normal for schools to do their own homework like this?
I mean, yes and no. Like this kid, like you have the camp for these situations. You just don't know who it's going to be.
Yeah.
You're waiting for a young man to stand out at camp. Ohio State camps are big. So, I mean, you got to be a dude to make that impression. I don't know how he ran 5'10", 5 and the L drill and all that stuff. Somebody said, hey, we know about this kid, but now we need to zero in because somebody had to tell Hartline or he just knew immediately to go watch him because there's so many kids. I can't even imagine what it's like trying to organize that, to have eyeballs on, because you want to impress the kid if he's that good and get him while he's on campus to talk to him. They did it. So they must have done some pre-scouting. Maybe every coach in Ohio tries to send kids to Ohio State. So they're overwhelmed with that. So they can't trust the high school coaches. No offense, they can't. Everybody wants their kid to be at Ohio State. So they got to do their own thing. That's got to be wild. It's one of the answers I really don't know because, can you imagine how many kids from Ohio try to get an offer from Ohio State at camp?
Yeah.
And, I mean, some of these kids walk out there, they look the part, but they can't play a lick. So this kid had some kind of juice, I'm guessing, in the drills and whatnot to get them to lock in. And again, size doesn't hurt.
Speaking of size and a player doing something to get the coach's attention, this next player that committed over the weekend was Jake Cook. And Brian, I was doing some reading and digging on him. He went to 2 recruiting camps. Didn't get an offer while he was there. Got a little down while he was there at the school. All of a sudden, Justin Fry calls him the Saturday before Father's Day and basically in the conversation says, hey, surprise your dad on Father's Day. You got an Ohio State offer and you're coming to the school on an official visit. He committed during, I think, at the end of that visit. But he had to work. He had to grind. Jake Cook did, the offensive lineman, who many people think will play center at Ohio State. But I think his work ethic and really grinding and going back after not getting a visit an offer that first day shows a lot about the grit, the grind, and his determination to play in Columbus.
I love these kinds of stories. Kid just obviously wanted to be a Buckeye. Didn't exactly get the loving recruitment that other kids do. In-state guy, power player. I'm not sure what they thought of him on film because he played left tackle.
Yeah.
And I was watching him compared to his, I'm like, he's not playing left tackle at Ohio State. That's not happening.
No.
That's not happening. He's a grinder. He's a power player. He's a guard or a center. The center point is interesting. I wonder if he worked at center for them and snapped because that's not a normal skill.
Yeah.
You know, you got a 310-pound guy in front of you that's not friendly, and you're snapping before you can put hands on him. So that would be my guess because that spot is hard, man. And if you've got a guy that's a grinder that wants to be there, they're more than likely to entrust you with the football in your hand to start the play. So that's a cool story. I don't think he's an unbelievable prospect, but he's a power player, wants to be at Ohio State, and plays really hard. If they can get him to snap the ball, they got a good guy on the inside.
I think both of these guys are talking about today at the end of the show. They're both projects to me. Guys, you know the first one, the receiver, he's going to be redshirted automatically.
100%.
And I think Cook is going to be redshirted as well, just trying to really – like he's not a small kid. Like he's not an undersized offensive lineman. But like you mentioned it, you got to get that strength and conditioning program, that nutrition program as well to kind of get your body right. I think these two guys are projects, and I think they realize they're going to have to work to get on the field. And Brian, there's nothing wrong with that. You need to have guys that, one, work to get an offer, work to get that OV, work to commit, but then also keep that same mindset once they get on campus to grind to get on the field too.
If you don't, you're not going to make it at Ohio State. So, yeah, he was just watching his film. This is a kid that Woody Hayes would have liked. He's a physical downhill player, going to be better in the run game than the pass game. He can pass protect okay, but again, being fleet of foot is not his number one trait. He's not David Sanders. He's a guy that plays downhill, runs his feet, and tries to bury the guy in front of him. And he's massive. Those are good combinations. Now, Can they get him to understand the techniques possible to play not only Big Ten level, but upper echelon, compete against Michigan, which obviously has great defense. That's the only objective at Ohio State. If you do that, the rest kind of takes care of itself. So I think they should take a kid like this pretty much every year because there's an offensive lineman in Ohio every year that's at least borderline Ohio State, but he really wants to be there.
Mm-hmm.
He'll stick it out and play for you as a fifth-year senior. There aren't many schools that have that advantage, especially with linemen. We both know going through the portal this spring, how many good linemen were in the portal? Bro, that is scarce.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh, it's so bad.
Yes.
I watched some film stories. I'm like, oof. I don't know about that. This kid's got offers. Okay, that tells me where things are standing with some of these schools. O-line might be the worst position in college football right now. I don't know the exact reason for it, but man, the haves and have-nots along the trenches often determines who's in the top 5 of the rankings. I think Ohio State can take kids like this at least one a year and be fine. You still got to get the David Sanders of the world overall, but you got 5 guys up front. Not all of them have to be a 5-star prospect.
Brian, last thing here, and this is something that just entered my head. Jordan Davison. I don't know if you've heard anything about him recently. There's a lot of people around Ohio State talking, took an official visit to Ohio State. Maybe this is a spot for him. Maybe it is not. What have you heard about Davison recently?
Not a whole lot. I'm kind of waiting on him to pop because I think the dominoes, like you hear about quarterback dominoes, he's one of those guys that can transcend things. And as we talked the last time I was on the show, 3 running backs? That makes me wonder if something else is going on with Ohio State. If they take 3, so be it.
Yeah.
But that is really rare, man. Not just like, one of these guys isn't a slot. So I haven't heard anything as far as a timeline, and he's a modern day kid. Fair or not, he can probably wait as long as he wants, which I know fans don't want to hear. That's kind of the way it is. I was just chatting with a big-time running back that's down south. I don't know what I'm going to decide. I'll decide when I want. I'm like, okay, man, yeah. That's just the way it is. Like the elite players can do that. I hope it's sooner than later because I think other guys will fall in line if he makes a decision.
I will say this quickly. I just remember something I saw earlier. I know I said they're taking 3. I also saw recently that Bo Jackson was told they're taking 2 running backs.
Well, that means they're done, and either
Yeah.
who's decommitting or the kid from New Jersey's decommitting. If they're taking, I mean, look, they're at 2. I know
Yeah.
math.
Yeah.
So what's going on there? That's interesting.
Yeah, it's weird. Brian, appreciate you for coming on the show. A little earlier in the week, but the timing could not have been better. You can follow Brian on X at FBScout_Florida. You can follow me on the same platform at JSteven07. This has been Locked on Buckeyes. We'll see you next time.